You're listening to Natural Resources University. In this podcast network, our hosts are university researchers and extension specialists, opening your gateway to the science of natural resource management.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Scott Van Pelt Show. I'm your host, Scott Van Pelt. If you're not watching the video, you have no idea what I'm talking about. I routinely get mistaken for Scott Van Pelt of ESPN. One time, I literally had to pull out my driver's license on a Mississippi State game day weekend. Why Scott Van Pelt would be in a Starkville, Mississippi grocery store buying dog food, I have no idea. But I had to verify. I'm Bronson Strickland. I'm from Mississippi State University, and I'm a co-host of the Dear University podcast. And this was an endeavor that we launched about 3 years ago. And frankly, I was a little bit skeptical when we launched that podcast. I was hoping we would have a dedicated following of maybe a few hundred people. It turns out that we are very fortunate. There's a whole bunch of deer enthusiasts all across the U.S. that were really excited and appreciative to have this form of communication, relatively new form of communication, via podcasting. So we've had great success. We've been reaching a lot of different audiences that me as an extension educator would never have reached in the past. And the one constructive criticism that we always got was, we love what you're doing, we want more. And unfortunately, time is limited. Steve Damaris, my co-host, we do as many as we can, but our time is limited. So to address that, what we're hoping is that, first of all, there are going to be more Dear University episodes coming out very soon. But also, we are now launching a collaborative effort called Natural Resources University Podcast. And so we are expanding the stage. We are getting other subject matter experts, extension educators, researchers from across the country to make a contribution based on their expertise. So today, let me introduce you to all of my collaborators for this Natural Resources University podcast. So, hey, Marcus, how about I start with you?
How's it going, Bronson? Good to see you. Yeah, so I'm Marcus Lashley. I'm assistant professor at the University of Florida, and I'll be hosting Fire University. You've probably heard me before on Dear University, as I've been on at least a few dozen episodes with Bronson.
Yeah, if you've listened to Dear University, you should be no stranger to Marcus Lashley. And someone else going around the horn here that has been on Dear University, Jared. How about introducing yourself?
Hey, Bronson, thanks for having me. I'm Jared Brook, Extension Wildlife Specialist at Purdue University up here in Indiana, and I'm one of the co-hosts of Habitat University.
And Adam.
I'm the other co-host of Habitat University. Really excited to be joining the podcast network. And my name's Adam Janke. I'm an Extension Wildlife Specialist at Iowa State University.
Mitch.
Yeah, hi Bronson. Thanks for having me. My name's Mitch Ziske, and I'm an assistant professor at Purdue University. And I haven't been on Deer University before. That's because deer probably don't end up in ponds very often. But I'm the co-host of a new podcast called Pond University.
For those of you that don't recognize the accent, Mitch is from South Louisiana.
A little bit further south than Louisiana. I'm originally from Brisbane, Australia.
All right. Glad to have you, Mitch. And co-hosting with Mitch, Megan.
Hi, Bronson. Hi, everybody. My name is Megan Gunn. I am a recruitment and outreach specialist in the Department of Forestry and Natural Resources at Purdue University, and also the co-host of Pond University.
Thank you, Megan. And the person we need to introduce that hopefully will hold it all together, Charlotte.
Hey, Bronson. Yes, I am Charlotte Nowak. I am the communications specialist at the University of Florida, and I'm responsible for managing the platforms for this Natural Resources University network that we are creating.
Thank you, Charlotte. Okay, real quick, why don't we take a few moments, let everybody know what they're in store for in terms of the subject matter? Me, myself, I can't comprehend. Why would someone not solely be focused and interested on deer? Evidently, there's a few people out there that might care more about fish or fire or habitat or something like that. So, Marcus, we'll start with you again. What is your podcast all about?
Yeah, so again, I'm going to be hosting Fire University, and for those of you who don't get it from the name, we're going to talk about fire ecology quite a bit. Because of my background and interest, a lot of that focus will be on how we use fire to manage wildlife resources, so habitat for wildlife, especially game species. Since I grew up hunting and fishing, I'm really interested in those species, and a lot of the constituents are. And I think we demonstrated pretty well, Bronson, by you having me on Deer University and bringing up fire essentially in every episode that I've ever been on, I'm pretty sure. Based on the feedback, there was a lot of interest even from your listener base. They were tuning in for deer, but they were really interested in some of the fire ecology work, it seemed, based on the feedback. So that's what I'm trying to do with this podcast as well, is, have a little more focus on fire ecology, but still bring that same kind of information for people that are interested in managing wildlife or forests or other resources on their property with fire.
Outstanding. And so you may talk about deer every now and again, but
Sure.
You may also bring in critters like a bobwhite quail or maybe even a wild turkey. I think you're kind of fond of turkey management, aren't you?
Yeah, you could say that. So that's the idea is, we'll cover lots of species, and sometimes we won't talk about wildlife. I'm planning to interview scientists, they're fire ecologists, either practicing or conducting the latest research on fire ecology. And sometimes the topic areas won't involve wildlife, but my research program is normally focused on wildlife responses to fire. So I'm sure that will be a really common focus in the podcast because of that.
All right. Well, let's go to the opposite end of the spectrum from fire. Why don't we talk about water and the aquatic side? So Megan or Mitch, whichever one of you wants to take the lead, you have the floor.
Great, thanks, Bronson. Yeah, I'm excited to talk about ponds and water and fish. I've come to notice that a lot of people who hunt also fish, and a lot of anglers will also hunt. And so I've been working with Jared Brook, the co-host of Habitat University, for a few years now on some extension and engagement programs here at Purdue. And we've really found that a lot of our constituents are one and the same. And so ponds are incredibly important throughout the US. Throughout the Midwest, there are hundreds of thousands of private ponds and small lakes, and the management of those often falls to the pond owner or the housing association around the pond or something like that. So what we found is, we really want to try and help those constituents manage their ponds and their water resources and the fish populations that are in them. I love fishing. And since moving to Indiana, I found myself fishing a lot in ponds, and ponds can be a great place to fish. And so we hope to bring in researchers, bring in professionals and extension educators that have spent their lives managing ponds and can talk about all sorts of different topics, from fish populations to vegetation management to maybe building a new pond on your property. So,
thanks, Mitch. Megan.
We also are bringing in students to talk a little bit about what they know and the research that they've been doing on campus for a while. My background is in stream ecology, so I bring the stream and river aspect to it. I don't know much about ponds, but just recording the first 2 episodes, it's not that different, but also a lot different.
The one thing that we hope to get out of Pond University is to allow people to see that, ponds, even though they can be small, maybe not much more than a muddy puddle in the ground, they're still pretty complex, and the things that you do on the land can impact what happens in your pond and vice versa. So we also hope to bring in some pond owners themselves and maybe get them to talk a little bit about their success stories or their complete disasters that they've had to help educate some of us. So
I think that's what's really going to be interesting for people Mitch, for example, with your podcast, one thing that links all this together is ecology. And whether it's managing a deer population, turkey population, etc., fish population, the concepts of ecology are what unifies this. And I think that'll be apparent to people once they give all of these podcasts a listen. Another common thread that we have is every animal needs habitat. And so we have two experts that are going to lead the Habitat University podcast. So Jared, I'll start with you if you want to say a little bit about what your vision is for the Habitat University podcast.
Yeah, so if you haven't figured it out already, our names are pretty creative, right? They're all nice and straight to the point. So if you listen to Habitat University, you should expect to hear about habitat. So we're going to talk a lot about the concept of habitat, what it means to wildlife, and maybe even we might even get into some fish habitat as well. How you could go about managing it. And we're really going to take that science behind and the research behind how we create and improve habitat for a variety of different wildlife species and break that down and distill it into some management points and some action items that you can take on your property. And I think that's what sets our podcast and this whole podcast network apart from a variety of different podcasts you can listen to, is that we're really going to hone in on that extension mission of taking the science and letting the science inform the management that we do on the ground. So if you're a little bit of a science nerd and really like kind of how things work behind the scenes, I think our podcast and this whole podcast network is going to be good for you. But at the end of the day, it's all going to be stuff that you can take and you can apply in your property or apply on property you manage and talk with other landowners. So we're going to try to make it as practical as possible while giving you some really good background information about how things work and how the science works.
Thank you, Jared. Adam.
Yeah, and so just to build on what Jared said, I think our podcast will connect to all of the other podcasts in the network because one of the really important wildlife habitat management tools that we use is prescribed fire. One species of wildlife that many landowners or land managers are often interested in managing for are white-tailed deer. And of course, aquatic ecosystems are really important wildlife habitat for a bunch of both terrestrial and aquatic species of wildlife. And so we're going to delve into those as well. We're going to take it, our plan for right now is to kind of take a two-stage approach. First, we're going to try to get everybody on the same page about what the heck we mean when we say even the word wildlife habitat. And then we're going to talk about the tools that we use to manage wildlife habitat and some of the approaches that we can use to monitor our outcomes. And then we're also going to, in our second season, we're planning to basically just hit the ground and try to talk to people that are managing wildlife habitat on private land or on national or state wildlife refuges for a whole diversity of species. And through that, we hope to learn from those people and those examples about wildlife ecosystems and the tools we can use to make places a little better for wildlife.
Okay, thank you, Adam. And speaking of thanks, I think we need to collectively thank the Renewable Resources Extension Act. And so that is the mechanism by which we were able to gather people together and launch this endeavor. And so that is essentially an act. It is a source of funding from the National Institute of Food and Agriculture within the USDA. And the purpose of that is getting information, as Jared spoke of a moment ago. It is to inform landowners on providing them information for how to manage natural resources, specifically on private lands. So that is largely our mission here within our jobs, and then also the mission of this podcast collectively, is we want to provide you information to help you and enable you to manage, whether it be the habitat, whether it be fish, whether it be your forest, or of course, deer and things like that. But that is the purpose. So we want to thank the RREA, the Renewable Resources Extension Act, for their funding and enabling this and helping us to get going. How is this going to work? So essentially, if you are a follower, listener of Deer University, it's essentially going to be the same mechanism. Whatever your podcatcher service is, whether it be provided by Apple through their podcast or iTunes, whether it be Google Play, whether it be Stitcher, Podbean, et cetera, just go and search for Natural Resources University. And you are going to be able to hear all of these topics are going to be within the feed of Natural Resources University. So once you find that, subscribe, and then you're going to be able to hear all of these topics as we release them. And I guess I will pass it back. Folks, that's really all I had in terms of I'm excited. We're finally able to launch this. This has been in the works for a year now, and the day has finally come. Anything else from the crowd?
Yeah, thanks, Bronson, for leading the way, showing us that this is a valuable model. And I hope the listeners are really interested. I would add to what you said that, if people are following Deere University and don't want to hear about these other topics, I don't know why that would be the case. But you don't have to follow all of them at once, but you have the option to do that. Like you said, if you go to Natural Resource University, you'll have access to all of them simultaneously, and they'll all come up in your feed. But you can follow Fire University or Pond University or any of them individually as well if you're primarily interested in one topic area.
Yeah, you're right, Marcus. I can't fathom, someone would not want to listen to Deere University. But yes, you do have that option with this, is that you can listen to the Natural Resources University feed, and you're going to get episodes from everyone. Or if you're only interested, for example, in the aquatic side, you can just go and subscribe to Pond University, for example. So lots of flexibility, lots of options.
And one other thing, Bronson, I know that we're going to have a social media presence like the MSU Deer Lab, the UF Deer Lab, which I'm the director of, will certainly have that, and we'll have it for Natural Resources University as well. So people can, get additional content or follow up on some of the things we're talking about through those avenues as well.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you, Marcus, for bringing that up. Yes, we will have a social media presence for this podcast. We're going to try to do notifications as new episodes are loaded up. We're going to let people know what the episode is all about and keep people informed. Yeah, thank you. Mm-hmm. So I thank every one of you, all of the co-hosts. I'm glad we're finally ready to launch, and I'm very excited about what the future holds. We also hope that we can grow this. We've been talking about adding other subject areas as well, more soil and water. We're even thinking about timber management and things like that. So the list goes on and on. We just hope to grow this, make it larger, have as big of a presence as possible. So thank you, everyone. Thanks to RREA for making this possible, and we will see you soon.
Natural Resources University is funded by the Renewable Resources Extension Act. New episodes are released every Tuesday. For more information, follow us on our social media platforms at NR_University.